Thank you. Councillors and visitors, please remember to switch your electronic devices to silence. Welcome along tonight, everybody. I would also like to welcome our viewers at home who are watching the meeting via the live stream. Before we get started this evening, in line with state government restrictions, it remains mandatory for everyone to have signed in using the Safer WA QR code or the hard copy register. Thanks. We'll now move on with the meeting. If I could ask you all to please be upstanding. And Deputy Mayor Bianca Sandri, could you please read out the opening prayer?
Almighty God, we ask you to guide us in all our discussions to show goodness, honesty, understanding and wisdom in all that we undertake to do. May we respect each other's views at all times, and we ask all of this in your name.
Amen. And Councillor Perkoff, if I could ask you please to read the acknowledgement of country.
On behalf of councillors, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation on which this meeting is taking place, and show our respect for elders past, present and emerging.
Thank you. You can all be seated. Thanks. Please note that without prior approval, any recording of this meeting is prohibited. Members of the public should note that no action should be taken on any resolution of council prior to written advice from the city being received. That now takes us to item 1, which is the official opening. Ladies and gentlemen, I now declare the council meeting the 23rd of February 2021 open at 7:01 p.m. Item 2, appendix and apologies. The Chief Executive Officer, Stuart Jardine, is an apology this evening. Item 3, approved leave of absence. Councillor Suzanne Migdale is granted the leave of absence for the period 10th of February 2021 to 14th of March 2021 inclusive. And Councillor Elizabeth Ree is granted a leave of absence for the period 10th of February 2021 to the 14th of March 2021 inclusive. Disclosure of interest. From the Community and Resource Committee meeting on the 16th of February 2021, myself disclosed an impartial interest in item 12.1 PRS1 as I've met with Scouts WA and the CEO on several occasions. Myself disclosed an impartial interest in item 12.1 PRS2 as I met with the committee to discuss potential sites. Councillor David Lagan disclosed an impartial interest in item 12.1 PRS3 as he previously door-knocked homeowners in the general area of the right-of-way. Councillor Bianca Sandri disclosed a financial interest in item 12.1 PRS3 as she owns a property on Normanby Road. Whilst it does not directly abut the area in question, it runs behind the rear block of the dwelling. Myself disclosed an impartial interest in item 12.1 PRS4 as I am an honorary member of the Karrinyup Rotary Club. Councillor Karen Caddy disclosed an impartial interest in item 12.1 PRS4 as she is an honorary member of the Karrinyup Rotary. And Councillor Carla Perkoff disclosed an impartial interest in item 12.1 PRS4 as he is an honorary member of the Karrinyup Rotary Club. From the Council of 23rd of February 2021, or 4, Councillor Felicity Farrelly has disclosed an impartial interest in item 14.4 as she owns property on Scarborough Beach Road. Councillors, are there any other disclosures of interest this evening? No indication. I'll now go on to item 5, petitions. The City has received no petitions to be tabled this evening. Councillors, do you have any unverified petitions you wish to present this evening? Councillor Proud, was that you raised? Have you got a petition? No, thank you. Item 6, responses to previous questions from members of the public taken on notice. All questions from the previous council meeting were published in the minutes of that meeting. Item 7, public question time. We'll now move on to public question time and ask Miles Harmer if you'd like to come forward, please. Thank you. If you just press the button on the bottom of the microphone and your name and address. Thank you.
Hello, Miles Harmer, 83A North Street, Mount Lawley. The city's decision to locate the Hamer Park Clubroom on Woodson Street was based on extensive consultation with all stakeholders over many years and a detailed feasibility study of potential locations. Further consultation with all stakeholders showed 62% support for the Woodson Street location. $72,000 was spent on consultation and the city had shown due diligence. Ward councillors were warned that extending the consultation would potentially disadvantage other residents. Shouldn't that have been the end of the matter and the building process begun in 2019?
Councillors took on board all the information presented to them and then they made a decision. The item is on the agenda tonight for tender approval.
I think that's my point. They took on the information that was presented
Not for
to
debate,
them,
Mr Harmer. Thank you.
but only went to the ward councillor. A lobby group first raised concerns in the community regarding parking, traffic and safety on Woodson Street in the community consultation run from the 1st of April to the 12th of May 2019. The city consistently showed to the local councillor, that's the point, and the community that these factors with others had been included in their technical analysis. It didn't go to all of you. To deal with the misinformation and misconceptions, the city put explanations on FAQ sheets on the websites. They emailed detailed responses to the ward councillors, not to all of you, and concerned residents, and directed them to the information on the city website. 2 information sessions to which ward councillors and concerned members of the community were invited. And finally, very detailed sheets addressing all concerns and explaining why Woodson Street was chosen and the North Street location did not make it to the final 4. What more could the city have done to demonstrate to ward councillors, and then perhaps all of you, that their decision was based on all the facts?
Mr Harmer, council takes on board all the evidence provided as well as community views and then bases their decision on this to the best of their ability.
Which information should have determined the location of the Hamer Park clubroom? The information that the city had gathered and which was relevant and factually correct and was provided directly to ward councillors and the community, but not to the General Council, who make the decision to support the Woodson Street location. The facts support the Woodson Street location. Should that make the decision? Or should the information provided by a lobby group, who ignore all the factual evidence provided to them by the city, delay the process and come in here to persuade councillors through direct feedback and petitions to drop the Woodson Street location based on information that had been repeatedly shown to be incorrect? So they came in and lied to you, basically.
Thank you. And the simple answer is all of it should be taken into account.
But it wasn't, was it?
Thank you, Mr Harmer. Alison Bunker, please. Just your name and suburb, thanks.
Alison Bunker, 83A, North Street, Mount Lawley. This goes to how decisions are made in the council. In August, the city wrote detailed sheets addressing all the concerns raised by Woodson Street Group and why an alternative location on the other side of Hamer Park, the one currently being put forward, was not included. Yet, on the 3rd of December, a report was presented to Community and Resources Committee which included the decision to drop Woodson Street. When was this change of location initially discussed? Through freedom of information, we have not been able to find any documentation of where this decision was discussed, and was it discussed between the Mayor and the Director of Infrastructure?
No, it was not a discussion between myself and the Director of Infrastructure.
Thank you. Who made the decision to consult the sports clubs, but not the other stakeholders, to determine whether they would oppose dropping the Woodson Street location in favour of one access from North Street?
I don't believe that decision was made. I believe that everyone was consulted.
Was the decision to drop the Woodson Street location taken at the briefing to some councillors on the 26th of August, 4 days before the council meeting, or was it taken before that briefing or after that briefing?
I haven't got that information on me, Ms Bunker, so I will respond to you in writing for that one.
Thank you.
Tim Pearson, please.
Good evening. Tim Pearson, Scarborough. Two questions. The first one's in 2 parts. Is the City of Stirling willing to take over control of the Scarborough Beach redevelopment zone? And if so, when?
Sure. Mr Roddick, could you provide some information?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Mr Pearson, for your question. Yes, the City of Stirling are willing to take back the Scarborough redevelopment area. We're working through that process, which is called normalisation, which is bringing back the planning authority to the City of Stirling, and we're working that through with Development WA.
Terrific, thank you. Second question is the City of Stirling willing to abide by the approved master plan and design guidelines which its own planners and other experts help develop with the broader community, including architects, developers, builders, businesses, and a lot of local folks?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Roland Hadley. Thanks, Mr. Hadley. Just your name and suburb.
Roland Hadley, Woodlands. On the 28th of October 2020, Peter Hunt Architect Company was paid $72,558. What does this relate to? And
Miss Pickering. No, just joking. Miss Hawkins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms Pickering might be able to give the same answers to me. Mr. Hadley, I'll take that question and notice and provide that to you in writing.
okay, thank you. Part B of that question was, can the council provide details for any payment over $10,000 in future?
Thank you. Miss Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, sorry, Mr. Hadley, maybe not understanding the question, but in terms of the information that's provided monthly, that's every payment that's made regardless of the value?
Thank you. Second question, how many councillors in the past 6 months have queried any payment in the chart of accounts? Who, what, why, where and when? Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll have to respond to you in writing. Mr.
Thank
Hadley.
you. Question 3, for whose benefit is any proposed change of name for the Stevenson Highway?
I'm not sure if I understand your question, Mr. Hadley.
Okay, I shall continue. This highway was designed in 1955 and has been recognised by most people since 1955 and beyond as the Stevenson Highway. For what reason would you like to change it?
There is no item on the current agenda to suggest we do change it. We asked for, or myself, if you're referring to, asked for a report to come with options to consider it.
Thank you. Just a personal note, one must wonder when this reconciliation process will cease and how many future Prime Ministers will have to make a national apology.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I should hope it doesn't cease, Mr. Hadley. Mr. Wheeler?
Good evening, Mayor Owen. Simon Wheeler, Scarborough.
Thank you.
Similar question. I don't know if it has, but anyway. To item 14.4 on tonight's agenda, the officer report notes, I think ad nauseum, that to normalise the Scarborough redevelopment area, due to occur in June this year, Mayor Owen, according to Development WA, that the city needs to amend the LPS 3 and create a development contribution plan. Despite this tardiness, the report proposes council resolve to do nothing for another 6 months and notes no actions it may or may not be taking to return control of Scarborough back to the city. Mayor, Karanup Regional Centre has been waiting nearly 7 years for planning controls required by state policy to be in place. It's waited so long that the planning policy has now changed. If this council allows the current process regarding Scarborough to continue in this fashion, normalisation will not occur for at least 4 to 5 years, at which time there'll be no need for it. Without going into the reasons that the community want normalisation to happen now, Mayor Owen, my question is, what justification does the city have for the timescale this is taking?
Sure. Mr. Roddick?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Mr. Wheeler, for your question. The city was first approached in August 2019 by Development WA to consider working through the normalisation process. As I stated before, that's about transferring the planning authority back to the City of Stirling. And we've been working with the Development WA team since that. Most recently, in consideration of that transfer of authority back to the City of Stirling hasn't been as simple as what once thought because of the need for the City of Stirling to create its own development contribution plan. That will be a complex amendment and the City will need to consider that. That wasn't planned in our budget previously, and of course we will now consider that as part of the 21-22 budget. There's a bit of work involved in that developer contribution plan, and the city are continuing to work through that process. The comment about 4 to 5 years, I'd say that's unlikely. It'd probably be at least half that.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Owen, talking to Karanup residents unhappy with what they consider a disorderly planning process in Karanup West, a lot of regular feedback I get revolves around why their councillors, these are their words, why their councillors are doing nothing, why their councillors don't appear to even have an opinion on what's happening there. And I refer them to the city's governance framework. Section 3.5.2 of the governance framework states where there is a conflict between what would be in the interests of the city and what would be in the interest of a particular councillor or group of ratepayers, the councillor must vote and otherwise act in the best interest of the city. It appears to me, Mayor, this undemocratic bit of policy, which goes quite contrary to the intent of the Act, means that councillors aren't necessarily allowed an opinion until council votes to allow them to have one. And often in planning matters, when councillors don't even get to know about what's happening until sometimes 7 or 10 days before a decision is made, the horse has already bolted. And so to your constituents, it often appears that you're doing nothing or don't care. And that's not fair, because I believe that councillors are hamstrung by this bad bit of governance. The Model Code of Conduct proposed to be adopted tonight contains nothing that supports this governance. And will Council consider tonight proposing a review of the governance framework to harmonise it with the Code of Conduct, the Model Code of Conduct, and the intent of the Local Government Act?
Yeah, that's something we can certainly take on board. Look, I do understand what you're asking, Mr. Wheeler. I think it is important to note that while some of the community may feel that way, as you've pointed out, it's certainly not reflective of the work I know that
I've defended you in shining
armour.
armour.
Sorry, we're not debating. And it's certainly not reflective of the work the councillors do in the community, and the councillors certainly can have an opinion. They can certainly share their views on their feelings and what they think about aspects of a development or something that may be affecting the community, and advocate for them. What they can't do is go out into the community when a DA will presently be before council and tell everyone what their vote will be. And they're very different things.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I haven't got any other indications. Is there any other questions in the gallery? If not, I will move on. And we'll go to item 8, which is applications for leave of absence. Councillors, are there any applications for leave of absence? Councillor Boothman?
16th to 18th of March, please.
Thank you. Councillor Boothman, are there any other requests? If not, can I have a mover and a seconder for the leave of absence, please? Move Councillor Sargent, seconded Councillor Caddy. If we can just vote on that, thanks. That is unanimous. Thanks, councillors. Item 9, confirmation of minutes. Councillors, can I have a mover and a seconder to accept the council minutes of the 9th of February 2021 meeting? Move Councillor Hatton, seconded Councillor Spagnolo. If we can vote on that one, thank you. Thank you. That is unanimous, councillors. Item 10, announcements by the presiding member. I have nil. Item 11, unresolved business from previous meetings. There is nil. We'll now move to item 12, which is reports and recommendations of committees. Councillors will move firstly to the Community and Resource Committee items. Any alternative motions that were submitted to governance prior to 12 have been included. Item 12.1 ES1, item 12.1 PRS3 and item 12.1 TE3 are required to be pulled out this evening. I will also note that item F2 is correct in the agenda, but it is incorrectly listed on your running sheet as Inglewood Heritage. So please just make sure you take note of that in your running sheets. Councillor Sargent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 12.1 PS2 with the alternate rec on that one.
Sorry, 12.1 PS2. Yep. Is there any other ones that need to be pulled out? Councillor Sargent?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, could you actually repeat the ones that are coming out?
Sure. So
please?
It's item 12.1 ES1, It is item 12.1 PRS3 and item 12.1 TE3. Yeah, sorry, and 12.1 PS2, the one that just got pulled out then. Oh, great. Okay, let's move on. So we'll go on to item 12.1 ES1, which is the extension of the contract for the provision of illuminated street signs within the City of Stirling. It's been referred to Council. Councillor Sargent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have given the officers an alternative recommendation. This is the alternative recommendation that I did send around to all councillors last night. Would you like me to read it, Mr. Mayor, or give councillors a minute to read it?
Just, I think, yeah, councillors, if you can read it. Yep.
I can read it, the whole thing? Yeah. All right. That council endorsed the extension of the contract for Claude Outdoor Pty Ltd for the provision of illuminated street signs within the City of Stirling for an optional second 5-year period on the basis that the signs are removed from the following locations that present an amenity issue to abutting residents. A, the intersection of Flora Terrace and Castle Road in Trigg. The B, intersection of West Coast Drive and North Beach Road in North Beach. And C, the intersection of West Coast Highway and Ventuna Street in Scarborough. Number 2, that the illuminated street signs policy be amended to include the following clause 2.9. Signs shall not be permitted in the suburbs of Waterman's Bay, North Beach, Trigg and Scarborough. And number 3, that council endorse an exemption of fees that the contractor is required to pay to the city for a period of 1 year for any signs that are removed at council's request. I so move, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. A seconder for this motion? Councillor Proud. Is there anyone opposed? Sure. Will anyone else be asking any questions? Yeah, so we will go to the mover then, if that's...
I'm not sure whether to give a long spill or a short spill.
You have the right to close, so go for the short one.
Is it just questions? I'll reserve my right to close, Mr. Mayor, and I'll hear the questions.
Thank you. Councillor Proud. Councillor Sandri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to seek clarity on point 3 with the fees, how do we intend to do that if the sign's being removed? I don't have an issue with the motion, just wanted clarity on that. Thank you.
Sure, Ms Littleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, essentially, we would exempt or recover or provide a rebate of the value of the sign revenue that we would receive for that 1 year.
Sorry. So just for clarity through the Mayor, we will be providing them a refund for a year on those 3 signs.
Mr Littleton?
Yeah, look, essentially we will cover the cost that we would generally recover from the sign. We would provide that as a rebate.
So I think...
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Is it clear? Yeah. I'm not really clear, so I'm happy if you keep pushing.
Okay, just to be clear, so I'm assuming we've been paid a set amount of revenue. I'm assuming if we're asking them to remove the signs as soon as possible to enable the extension of 5 years, then we would effectively be providing them a refund from our pocket into their pocket for those 3 signs. Is that correct?
Mr Littleton?
Well, it would just be an exemption or a credit, if you like, of fees that we are to receive next year. So we're not actually paying them, it will be resolved through next financial year, but effectively we would generate revenue for those 3 signs. We would exempt them that revenue and rebate it back to them.
So just to be clear through the Mayor, but if they're being removed, how can that occur next financial year? So all I'm just asking is, are we just providing a refund? Is it as simple as that?
And to clarify, Ms Littleton, my understanding is we don't actually charge the revenue for the signs. We get, I would think, the provider charges revenue to the advertisers and is paying us as contract.
Yeah, that's correct. But
so
we
think
would
the question
generally
is also,
derive a revenue. we're going to pay them because, so effectively, not only will we not receive that, but, you know, to effectively offset the value that they've already expended, we would just provide them with that as a rebate or a refund. So against the revenue that we will receive next year from the other 17 signs that are already in place.
And is the value of that, Mr Littleton, the equivalent of what we would have received, or is it also the equivalent of what the advertiser would have paid them?
No, just with what we would receive.
Thank you. Thanks. Councillor Spagnolo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I think I recall, if my memory serves me correctly, this debate taking place about 20 years ago, and probably the only person that may recall would be Councillor Boothman, I would imagine, because he would have been on council at the time when the initial application was made. And as the numbers prevailed in those days, it didn't get off the ground, and I think it came into being 5 years ago when the contract was first accepted by this council. I think before we make any decisions, I've got to say, Mr Mayor, that we've got to understand the reason why we're permitting these signs out there. My understanding is that we're permitting these signs out there because we're trying to help small business. Now, the last time I checked, there is small business in the coastal ward as well as everywhere else. So why are we excluding the coastal ward? I don't support that part of the recommendation. I think it is wrong to do that. For a council that constantly promotes small business and helping small business, this is not the way to do it, Mr Mayor. And I don't accept that part of the motion. So
that is, just to be clear, though, sorry, that is the whole intent of the motion, I think.
I don't think so. That wasn't my reading.
Well, essentially, yeah.
Mr Mayor, I'm happy to clarify.
Sure, but the intent from what I'm reading is, apart from endorsing the contract, everything after that from A onwards is directly related to the coastal ward, that's all.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
I'm just saying it's embedded in the whole contract,
Yeah.
in this whole motion.
So happy for 2 and 3 to be put separately. Not an issue with any of that. If Councillor Spagnolo wishes that, but yeah, essentially we're endorsing the contract, but 3 signs being removed, and then 2 and 2. Yeah, 2.
Yep.
2 is all about the coastal ward. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, and I understand that, but it was just to be clear that the whole motion is embedded about, like, okay, you can vote on it. The A, B and C is about removing them out of the coastal ward.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I support A, B and C being removed on the basis that there are some concerns by residents, and the council is responding to that, and that's a great idea. So I just come back to my point that, you know, at the end of the day, we need to understand the reason why we're permitting a private organisation to do what they're doing, and that is put out these signs on behalf of businesses. And it's to help promote local business so that obviously they prosper. I think the other thing that we need to look at, Mr Mayor, is the criteria. Now, I think to have certain parts of the city that can have these things and certain parts that cannot, for various reasons, is not really the way to go. I think the criteria needs to be examined. The criteria needs to be clear. We've already said that we don't have these signs anywhere near residents. And there's a whole heap of other criteria that needs to be, if you like, abided to. So in the first instance, some of these signs should not have gone up in the first place because obviously they didn't comply with the criteria. So we need to be very, very certain about the criteria. The other thing is, it's all very well for people to ring up and say, listen, I don't want that sign there because that sign is irritating us, it's upsetting the local community. And we need to examine whether or not that sign was put there in the first place because it complied. And if it complied, that's fine. But if it doesn't comply with our criteria, well, then that's when we need to act. Because sometimes, Mr Mayor, I'm not suggesting this is the case in all of these 3 cases, sometimes you have a situation where a competitor might be concerned that a sign is up by the opposition and may probably encourage someone in the street to make a complaint. And so before we act, we need to make sure that that complaint is legitimate and it's not just, oh, look, I don't like the sign, then for that reason it needs to go. That's why we need to be very, very clear on our criteria. You know, for what it's worth, I just thought that I'd make those points because, like I said, we need to be sure about the criteria and we need to recognise the reason why we're approving these.
And you want these put separately?
If you would, please,
Sure.
Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Caddy, Unica.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So I think councillors are aware of the history of this. So when they first went in, a lot of signs did go in along the coastal ward. And as a result of quite a significant outcry, we did make a change to the policy. So the three remaining signs that I'm asking to be removed were installed before the policy change. And the policy change now basically says we won't put them in residential areas where there is a complaint. But we didn't, and they removed 6 signs, which I thought was actually very good of the contractor to remove those 6 signs. And a lot of the really high complaint ones were removed at that time, which is great. But these 3, I've continued to get complaints from neighbouring residents over the 2 years beyond that. And so I've been asked by those residents to get those signs removed now that the end of the contract is here. They were understanding that we had a contract in place and that these conformed to the contract at the time they were put in, but the contract has now changed. The terms of the contract has now changed, and it's appropriate that we should now remove these, given that we've made no promises to the contractor for the further 5 years. But further to this, so we've actually exempted these signs now largely in residential or adjacent to residential properties, which is great. We've also exempted them in the HPA area adjacent to residential properties, which is great. The problem that happens along the suburbs of Waterman's Bay, North Beach, Trigg and Scarborough is that these are coastal suburbs, and what we're finding happening is that the illuminated signs are going up next to POS or along the coastline, and nothing in our policy exempts that. So what people are complaining about is they've got beautiful views of a pristine coastline and a great big illuminated sign in front of them. We have the Trigg community who've all just paid $10,000 to have all their power lines undergrounded for the benefit of their views, and they're very rightly saying, why would you then go and put a sign up in front of the POS that obstructs my view with something? So, look, I think they've got a valid point, and I think our policy doesn't go far enough in terms of adjacent to POS. It only restricts it where it's in 50 metres from a residential property. I'm really comfortable for council, if the council feels that this is of value, I wanted to make it as easy as possible for council to continue to endorse this. But, you know, I've had my own objections, and I've had strong objections from the community that lives adjacent to the coastline, that they see these as visual pollution, that they don't value them in the community. And so, you know, I'm putting their views forward to council and asking you to please consider that those views have credence and that my community is saying, please don't put them up in our area. But I'm perfectly happy for the contract to be extended and to support the local businesses in the City of Stirling. But I will say that the evidence we've seen of the signs that have been put up, particularly in our area, they're not actually, some of them are directional to a local business, which is what they were intended. I'd say maybe 50%, but about 50% of them are supporting something that isn't adjacent to the sign. They're just being used as advertising signage rather than wayfinding, which really wasn't the intent that we'd envisaged for them. So it's probably about 50-50 whether they're actually achieving their purpose or not. But either way, look, I don't want to stand in the way of council continuing to move forward with this, but I do want to respect the views of my community that are saying we don't want these things adjacent to our POS and ruining our beautiful views of some extensive bushland and our ocean. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Caddy. Councillor Lagan.
Mr Mayor, just for clarification, through you to officers, number 1, A, B and C, were any of those signs non-compliant, not with the policy, but with the erection of the signs? And were any of the previous 6 that were removed, were they any of those non-compliant?
Thank you. Mr Littleton.
Look, I think if your question is, are they compliant with the current policy? So, with the policy that was subsequently amended post the advertising and an initial contract award, probably 2 of these signs probably don't conform to the current policy as it stands today, in that its proximity to the residential area. Generally, my recollection is that the 6 signs that were previously removed were in residential areas and were no longer compliant with the current policy. Having said that, Claude have been very happy to remove signs where community has expressed a substantial concern.
Councillor?
Yeah, just further to that, so you've indicated 2 were not. That has been sorted with the contractor?
Sorry,
2 of these ones,
2
Councillor.
of these ones that are currently part of this resolution do not comply with the current policy.
Does that have any effect on income that may be derived from those for the city in that they are non-compliant?
No, I mean they were compliant with the original policy. That's why they were approved. Council since obviously amended its policy, which would render 2 of these signs non-compliant. Council will lose out on the revenue derived by these signs should this recommendation get up for the 5 years.
Councillor, happy with that? Is there anyone else? If not, I will go to Councillor Sargent to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be quick. Firstly, thank you, councillors, for participating in the debate tonight. The last 5 years of this contract, Mr. Mayor, was, in my opinion, trying to get the policy right. That balance between the residents, the commercial and the industry, because ultimately, in the end, it's all about the small businesses of the City of Stirling and trying to get people to go and visit those premises. Most of the signs that I see out there are advertising small businesses or local centres, small businesses in those local centres. So I think it's generally right, but at the moment. But obviously, a couple of years into this contract, we changed the policy, which put a few signs out of whack from that policy, and we're just amending the contract once again. And I think after, if this motion gets up tonight, Mr. Mayor, I think after this, I think we've got the policy down to where it's just right. I think the balance between residents and what's happening in the commercial areas is just right, and I don't think we will see this policy and have these debates around illuminated signs going forward. So I'll leave it with that, Mr. Mayor, and I urge councillors to support the motion. And I believe we were going to put it separately, yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for that close. So this motion will be put in 3 separate parts. Move Councillor Sargent, seconded Councillor Proud. First of all, we'll vote on item 1, that the council endorses the extension with the removal of those 3 signs. If you could vote, please. Thanks. Councillor Spagnolo, I think just waiting for you. And that is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. We'll now go to part 2 of the motion. And we'll go to the vote. Thanks. And that motion is carried. And we'll go to part 3 of the vote. And we'll now go to the vote. And we've got, there we go, and that motion is also carried. So effectively the whole motion is carried. Well done, councillors. We're now going to item 12.1 PS2, the Campion Community Garden application. Councillor Sargent, it's been pulled out by Councillor Thornton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will hand this over to Councillor Thornton, who has an alternative rec.
Councillor, is it the same intent? It's just that it was a committee recommendation?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Councillor Thornton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the alt rec, which is that council endorses community consultation to begin in April 2021 for the proposed Campion Community Garden at Keith Clark Reserve, 59 Campion Avenue, Balcatta, and 2, that council considers listing $20,000 on the 2022 budget for the implementation of Campion Community Garden subject to positive community consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Spagnola has seconded that. Is there anyone opposed? Then I will put that motion. That is unanimous, councillors. We'll go to item 12.1 PRS 3, the reconsideration, acquisition, closure and dedication of right-of-way 29022 being lot 66, house number 46R, Normanby Road, Inglewood. This is pulled out as there is financial disclosure and Councillor Sandri is leaving the chamber. It's on page 165, Councillor Sargent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Lagan expressed an interest into moving the committee's recommendations, so I'll hand over to him.
Thank you, Councillor Sargent. Look, I'll move the officer's recommendation that was following committee.
Thank you.
The committee recommendation is 165.
Thank you. I'm getting confused up here. It'd be good if we just stuck with the chair moving these motions, councillor. Yeah, that is. Yeah, all right. I'd appreciate that. Is there someone who'd like to second this motion? Thanks. Councillor Sargent, let's go back to the chair of the committee. Yes. Is there anyone opposed? And I will put that motion. And that is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. If we can ask Councillor Sandri to return to the chamber. Thank you. We'll go to item 12.1 T3, the tender for Inglewood Oval, Moyle Pavilion, Clubroom 1 and Hamer Park 2 Clubroom. An absolute majority vote is required for this one, page 198. Councillor Sargent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As per your instruction, I will move the committee's recommendation.
Very much appreciated, councillor. And a seconder for this motion. Sure. Councillor Ferranti is going to second this. Okay. Is anyone opposed? If not, I'll put that motion. Thank you, and that is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. And we'll now go to the balance of reports. Councillor Sargent, if you'd like to move the balance.
I'll move the balance of reports.
Seconded, Councillor Proud. Is there anyone opposed? No, we'll put these. Thank you, and that is unanimous. Members of the gallery, please be advised the remainder of the Community and Resource Committee recommendations have been adopted by exception resolution. We'll now move on to the direct to council reports. Item 13.1, the elected member code of conduct on page 206. Do I have a motion, please? Councillor Lagan.
Yeah, I'll move the recommendation on page 206.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for this? Councillor Caddy. Is there anyone opposed? Councillor Farrelly. Then I will go to the mover of the motion, Councillor Lagan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, look, this is in response, obviously, to the new legislation that was released, and all elected members were given a copy of that. The only comment I would make was I did note item 8.1a that talks about personal integrity and talks about a council member, committee member, or candidate must ensure. Sorry, it's not that one, it's the next one. A council member or committee member must not be impaired by alcohol or drugs in the performance of their official duties. I actually asked a question at North Zone Walga about this and how that will be enforced and how one would be sure to act against someone who may or may not be making a decision when they're impaired. I think, generally speaking, all the elected members I know behave responsibly and certainly don't consume alcohol or other substances before they attend committee or council, so I'm happy with the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Caddy.
Just briefly, obviously what what's the motion before us is to adopt the model code of conduct for local governments. I've read the code of conduct. I think it's completely appropriate. It's not that different to the code of conduct we already have. And I certainly think it would be kind of a bad look for us not to be willing to accept the model code of conduct that has been put forward for local governments to adopt. I think it's absolutely reasonable what's being requested of elected members in the way we conduct ourselves.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Farrelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The model code of conduct, when it comes into the policy, I have a concern that it is not put into the policy in such a manner that it supports councillors to the degree that we're looking for. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and but my concern is that we haven't really looked at all aspects of it, and I'd like to see a bit more detail on that. Thank you.
Councillor, I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you asking for some advice on this now, or are you asking for more time to consider this?
Really more time to consider it, and I know that can hold things up. I'm not disagreeing that we have to have a code of conduct. I think it's absolutely necessary. I suppose as a new councillor and historic...
So I'll just stop you there for a sec. So there's a couple of options tonight. The option is to adopt the model code of conduct. So we can either adopt this one and then you can work and talk your concerns through.
I'm quite happy to do that.
Okay, I was just making sure you weren't trying to hold it over.
No, that's fine.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak to this? If not, I'll go to Councillor Lagan. Would you like to close debate?
Nothing further to add. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, in that case, we will put the motion. Move Councillor Lagan, seconded Councillor Caddy. If you go to the vote, please. And that is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. We'll now go to item 14, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. We'll start with item 14.1. So notice a motion from Councillor Stephanie Proud on the speed limit reduction trial on Scarborough Beach Road, page 242. Councillor Proud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That the City writes to Main Roads WA requesting a 2-year speed reduction trial from 60 kilometres to 40 kilometres on Scarborough Beach Road between Northstead Street, Scarborough and St Bridget's Terrace, Doubleview.
Great. Is there a seconder for this motion? Councillor Caddy, is there anyone opposed to this motion? If not, we'll put that to the vote. There you go. That is unanimous. Thanks, councillors. Item 14.2, a notice of motion, Councillor Felicity Farrelly. The external minutes notification on page 245. The alt rec suggested is 248. Councillor Farrelly. Just your microphone, thanks, councillor. That's right.
I'd like to hold that over for the next council meeting. I want to have a discussion with the because procedure to hold it over.
Sure. Yeah,
thank you.
That's right. We've got a seconder just to hold this one over. Councillor Proud. We'll go to the vote. Thanks, councillors. That's unanimous. Item 14.3, notice of motion from Councillor Joe Ferrante, the feasibility of a community battery project on page 249, the suggested alt recs 253. Councillor Ferrante.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
That's on page 253.
That is correct, yeah.
Yep. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sandri, thank you. And we'll go to the vote. Sorry, is anyone opposed? No. Yep. Just checking. That is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. And item 14.4, notice of motion from Councillor Felicity Farrelly on the normalisation of the Scarborough redevelopment area, page 254. And Councillor Farrelly, you have an alternative rec.
Yes, I do. And I would like to make I'd like to move.
Yeah, if we can just have Councillor Farrelly's motion on the board, there it is.
At the the alternative.
Yep. So number one's the officer's alt rec, and then part 2 is, if you'd like to read that part out.
That the part 2 is that the Mayor writes to Development WA to seek its commitment in writing that while the process to transfer planning authority of the Scarborough redevelopment area back to the City of Stirling is taking place, the Scarborough redevelopment area planning framework and guidelines are adhered to in its assessment of all development applications. And the reason for this rec is to ensure that developments approved whilst the city negotiates the normalisation process of the Scarborough redevelopment area, that they meet the objectives of the redevelopment scheme and application planning documents.
Thank you, and that's clear. Whoever seconded for that motion? Yep, Councillor Spagnolo. Is there anyone opposed? Councillor Sandra.
Sorry, not opposed. I just have to declare an impartiality with the alt rec because I see on LRC as appointed by the minister. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll just do the paperwork for that one. So if there's no one opposed, Councillor Farrelly, I'll just get you to turn your mic off and then we'll go to the vote. Thanks, councillors. Just Councillor Proud. Yep, and that is unanimous. Thanks, councillors. Item 15, notice of motion for consideration at the next meeting. Councillors, would you like to submit any notice of motion for the next meeting? Is there any? Councillor Perkoff.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a big laugh.
I was trying to work out what this was.
I was going to do it like this, actually. First of all, thank the officers for putting this together for me. Mr Mayor, that the city investigates the feasibility and community need for the establishment of a multi-purpose community hub at Stirling Leisure Centres in Hammersley. That's at the corner of Aintree and Reserve in Hammersley.
Thank you.
You don't need
That's
the
good.
reason?
No, that's all right.
Background?
Form part. Councillor Boothman.
Yeah, I did submit a...
There is nothing there.
Okay, it's on the board there. You don't need to read it out, do you?
No, it's all right. Maybe just read the first part. Yeah. You happy with that, just to be there? Yep. Okay, is there any other notice of motions? Councillor Ferrante.
Thank you. The report be presented to the next ordinary meeting of council that explores initiatives in creating, establishing a startup tech hub within the Scarborough Beachfront locations in Osmond Park.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrante. Is there any other notice of motions? No. Thanks, councillors. Item 16, questions by members, of which due notice has been given. I have nil. Item 17, new business of an urgent nature. I have nil. Item 18, matters behind closed doors. There is nil. And that brings us to item 19, which is closure. And I now declare the meeting closed at 7:52 p.m. Thanks, councillors. Thanks to those at home. Good night. And we will do it again tomorrow night for the special electors meeting. Bye.